So this is a long time coming. Thank you for inviting me. The advising professional advisors here are an important part of how we work with our students to get them the supports that they need. I plan this as very informal. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes and then open up to questions. And I know that a lot of questions were pre-forwarded to me. I gave 2 handouts, and I'll explain what those are in about the middle of my talk. So just, hold on to those. Don't rustle them too much. Everybody moved relatively forward. That's good because I want to see you. I'm nearsighted. This is about the distance that I can make out most of your faces. And one thing you should know about me is that I'm really good with faces, but I really suck at names. So a lot of you, I know your names because we talk on the phone all the time, but I may not, recognize you up close. Do me a favor and just remind me if who you are, because it's not your fault. It's my problem. So let me talk a little bit about disability services. I'm going to talk about some changes that you probably all noticed this year and how we responded to those changes, what the impact has been on campus for my office and for our students and all of our faculty and advisors as well. So we'll talk about some recent changes, and then we'll have fun questions. You know that Disability Services is the office on campus that's responsible for access for students, faculty, and staff with disabilities. We operate under 2 relevant federal statutes. One is the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, that's 1973. And the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was recently amended. So that's the change that we're going to talk about, is the Amendments Act and the impact that it had on campus. What 504 and the ADA guarantee is not extra time on exams or private rooms or computers or scribes or ASL interpreters. It doesn't specify any of that good stuff. It guarantees freedom from discrimination in the environment. So it guarantees that an individual with a disability will not be discriminated against solely on the basis of their disability. And it is up to my office to determine, based on the disability and based on the activity that they're requesting accommodation for, what is a reasonable and appropriate accommodation. So we're the ones who decide if it's extra time, if it's a scribe, if it's a note taker, that's not prescribed in the law anywhere. The law, again, guarantees freedom from discrimination and that an individual with a disability can benefit from all of the programs and goodies that we have to offer at the university. So they can go to plays, they can attend lectures, they can attain degrees, just the same as everyone else who is not an individual with a disability. So we are leveling the playing field, and we take very great pains in the office not to tip that balance in favor of the individual with a disability or against the individual with a disability. If we're doing our balancing act correctly, my students have an equal opportunity to succeed or fail, same as everybody else. So we're not guaranteeing that they'll pass, we're not guaranteeing that they'll get A's, we're not even guaranteeing that they're going to do their best, which is often how it's couched to us. Well, I would do better if I had extra time. Well, so would I. Arguably, so would anybody. So our job is to figure out, does the individual require extra time so that they are not being penalized for their slow reading speed, or their slow writing speed, or their problems with thinking, or their problems with mobility. And if we decide that extra time is reasonable, how much extra time, under what circumstances, what kind of exams. So that's all of what goes on behind the scenes in our office. We are very busy in reviewing documentation that we require students to give us. That they have to give us medical documentation appropriate to their disability. That can vary depending on the nature of the disability. It could be a doctor's note, it could be a neurologist's letter, it could be a learning disability assessment that's 20 pages and that costs $4,000. It could be a number of different things. We determine also what's the appropriate documentation. What are we satisfied with? How extensive does it need to be? How recent does it need to be? What kind of professional needs to have done the assessment? It can't be, by the way, mom and dad. And we turn away a lot of documentation because we say this is not what we want. We need to see different, more newer, or none at all. There are some circumstances in which individuals don't give us documentation. It is quite obvious to us upon meeting that they are who they say they are, they need what they say they need. We reserve the right to ask them for disability documentation, but we may or may not. And we have been known, I've been here for 17 years, and we have been known as one of the more stringent universities in terms of documentation and decisions about disability accommodations. Not the worst, but not the most lenient either. We've all been guided up until now by a number of Supreme Court decisions that were handed down in the late 90s and early 2000s that encouraged a very stringent bar, that a person had to basically prove that they needed an accommodation, that they were a person with a disability. And language was used, such as our own, late Senator Kennedy, that the intent of the ADA was not to accommodate hangnails, that someone had to prove that they had a substantially limiting condition in order to qualify for an accommodation. And higher ed took that very seriously because we also have an academic mission. We have to be responsible for the quality of our classes and the degrees that we hand out can't be watered down. So we all took that very seriously. We took it pretty seriously here. And we used to say no a lot. We used to say, come back later, come back not at all, bring us something different. So we basically used to turn down, I'd say 30 to 35% of the requests for accommodations didn't make it through the process. And that was, consistent with other universities that had a high bar. Well, we were, very comfortable doing that, establishing great relationships, I think, with faculty, with advisors. Everybody understood that we were not letting everybody through the gate, that we were being fairly stringent about that. In 2008, the Americans with Disabilities Act was amended. Effective 2009, it took a couple of years to filter from employment down to higher ed. So for a while, we all hunkered down and said, what is this going to mean? Let's just watch. We trained, we talked to our general counsels, we talked to experts in the field, and just sort of said, let's wait and see. Because the new ADA has a very different thrust than the old ADA. The new ADA was specific in saying we want the broadest possible coverage of the law. We don't want to be strict gatekeepers. We don't want to be involved in stringent statistical analysis to find out if someone is disabled or not, to find out are they significantly impaired as compared to most people in the general population. Well, does that mean a statistical average? Do we have to look at how far off an average someone is? Those are the things we used to be told to do. Now we're told no. You want to look at the broadest possible coverage, you want to be more lenient in the documentation you require, and more flexible in the decisions. So it completely upended how most offices were making their decisions, and there are some universities that caved completely in response to that and said, you know what, all takers, come in, tell me who you are, tell me what you need, and we'll give it to you. And that would not be inconsistent with the statutory language of the ADAAA, Americans with Disabilities Amendments Act. We decided that that was not consistent with how our university operates, and that we would still require disability documentation. We would still have a substantive discussion with the student. What changed is now we are involving the students more, so we can often work with less documentation. We can have a student come and talk to us and tell us what's going on, backed up by less stringent documentation, and then we are more likely to say, okay, we'll give an accommodation a try, or let's do provisional for the semester and see how you do, or let's do provisional while you go out and get more documentation. So we are, while I wouldn't say warm and fuzzy, we are warmer and fuzzier than we have been in the past. And I know that you've heard complaints about us from students who've said, I keep going and they keep saying no. Well, we're less likely to say no outright now. We're more likely to say, let's see what we can work with and let's see what we can do. But rest assured that we're not giving away the farm. We are still holding academic standards very dear. We're talking to faculty. We're finding out whether these accommodations are reasonable. That hasn't changed. The accommodations we're clearing haven't changed. But the amount of people that we're saying okay to has changed. Which brings me to this first handout. This was prepared for, so many of you have heard it, for a presentation to the Provost and to the deans. This is the impact on our numbers. Because last year was the first year, academic year 12-13, was the first year that everybody felt the impact in higher education of the ADAAA. For a while, we've been watching, our numbers were creeping up, but last summer, the Association for Higher Education and Disability handed down their guidelines for how to interpret the ADAAA, and they were off the wall in terms of what they said we should do. But when we changed our approach, we noticed that the numbers rocketed up. It took a full year for us to get through the students and be able to take a breath and count and look back and see what had happened. So I did a review going back 5 years. You have 3 of those 5 years. So you can see the impact of the ADAAA in academic year 12-13. We went up by 70%. These are new file reviews. This isn't our total caseload. These are the new students who came in with new files to review, or old students who came back with new documentation that we had said no to and came back with more. So we had to deal with 70% increase in the number of students that we reviewed, and you can see that it's quite different from the previous 2 years. We said yes. Instead of saying no to 35% of these students, we said yes or maybe to probably 80%. So, it was a lot of accommodation letters, and how many of you heard from faculty, or how many of you are faculty, who said, oh my God, I used to have 1 student in my class of 50, now I have 10. And you're telling me I have to arrange separate rooms, computers, scribes, all this stuff. Where did these students come from? That was the climate in which the federal class action lawsuit that brought me here emerged. So it was a kind of a scary thing, because when faculty start to get nervous about this, and then they start to say, no, I can't do this, you're asking too much of me. And when faculty start to say no, and it's understandable, because we are asking a lot, then students and their parents begin to contact attorneys. And we don't want that. So that's why we did this review and took it to the Provost and the Dean's Council and everybody else. And we have sought assistance from associate deans in various schools to help spread the weight of this a little bit. So a number of schools have stepped up and said, we will help our faculty in locating rooms and locating proctors, in particular in smaller departments where people may not have graduate students to proctor. Various deans that we've talked to across the university have stepped up with that. So we're very grateful, because that gives us something to tell a faculty member who feels burdened, that no, we understand, we still have to do what's right, but this office can help you, this dean can help you. So we're grateful to our partners and mindful of the fact that it is a burden on faculty. We did write a faculty resource guide. We were told we can't say faculty handbook, but it is a faculty resource guide, which I believe is on our website now. Nick, is it?
I believe so.
It's on our website, but you have to sign into it using your Kerberos password, because we don't want it to be for student consumption or for public consumption. It's for faculty. It's for you guys to understand more about your responsibilities. It has some FAQs. It has a lot of information. We wrote that specifically with faculty input. We polled about 40 faculty and got a lively discussion going about what are their concerns, what are their issues, and what kind of help do you need. So we're being as responsive to faculty as I think we can be. I'm considering putting together some focus groups of faculty and students and administrators, and a lot of it is just dealing with the volume of students in the office and having enough time to do it. I should tell you that the numbers this year are tracking exactly as they were last year. So last year was not a blip. It was a real impact, and we've now had a year and a half to deal with this. So I think I'm comfortable saying that it's certainly not getting any lower. In terms of the types of students that we're seeing, there's been a shift in the past year and a half, and that I think is partly because of the new law. It's also partly because of demographic shifts. We're seeing less new incoming students with ADD or learning disabilities. We're seeing more students with psychiatric disabilities and with hidden medical disabilities. There's a whole little bubble of kids with Crohn's disease, irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel disease, kids who need substantive breaks during exams while they go to the restroom, perhaps for hours. And so these are students who have different kinds of needs. We have students who have chronic health conditions where they can't get to class and they can't hand in things. And so they're asking faculty for extensions and postponing exams and things that, we typically haven't asked before. And, as an academic myself, those kinds of requests make me nervous, So rest assured that we don't hand them out lightly. We have changed our language so it no longer says now separate distraction-reduced environment. It says distraction-reduced environment, which means a student can be in a room with 6, 8 other students taking a test as long as it's quiet. There's a small group of students who really need a solo environment. Maybe they pace or speak aloud to themselves or really need a solo, in which case faculty will see on the letter. Solo environment for testing. So we have changed the language of our accommodations to be more faculty friendly and to invite more discussion from faculty if they have any questions. And we've always been open to that, but we're even more so because of the volume of students that we're dealing with. I also gave you some vignettes. These are not cherry-picked, unusual situations. This is kind of run-of-the-mill of what we see. So the complexity of the students that we deal with and the number of problems that they bring to the table that we have to problem solve has changed, so that we have many more students with multiple disabilities and Crohn's, Asperger's, plus ADHD, rheumatoid arthritis and depression, anxiety, depression, and substance use. I mean, just very complicated kids. And so we are reaching out to partners all over the university, and that's why I think I know so many of you, because we've been calling you. And again, asking advisors to intercede with faculty. Advisors have access to information that I don't, that you guys do. You have different relationships with professors. So we have been reaching out to advising and encourage you to reach out to us. I think that's kind of all that I had kind of formally planned, except to give you a little bit of a preview about what's coming down the pike that you may be seeing in the next couple of years. One thing that we did last summer, in addition to all of this, and by the way, the presentations to the Provost resulted in 3 new full-time funded positions in my office. So, in an environment where they said no new positions ever, we were able to convincingly say, we need these jobs because we need help. In the midst of all of this, anybody faculty in residence here? Anyone live on campus? Well, if you did, you might have noticed that we now have some emotional support animals in residence. That was a new wrinkle in a different law that we dealt with. Is some of these students request, and a few require, that they have an emotional assistance animal to live in residence with them, to help them cope with their symptoms of disability. At the moment, we're holding firm, as is everybody, on emotional assistance animals in the classroom. However, spies who have ears to the ground that I don't have say that next year we may have to reconsider that. So you heard it now that there may be requests that animals come to class with students, and we will, as we've been dealing with the animals in residence, we have a very strict bar for that, because this is a big community and it's not a trivial thing to bring an animal into a classroom in a community like this one. So we'll do what's right, we'll do what we're legally required to do, but that's a situation where I'm not going to say, well, maybe let's try it. It's once we've done that, we've opened the floodgates. So I know that there were some prepared questions, but I also want to open to everybody else's questions, and feel free to ask me anything. We are being videotaped, so just be aware of that. Chris, do you want me to go through the ones that were pre-sent, or just open for?
Maybe we can do like 15 minutes of open question, and if we don't get to some of those, we can pick some out.
Okay.
I do want to point out we have 2 microphones, so we're happy to bring those around for people, just so that it's easy for everyone to hear. If you don't want to wait for us to carry those, just please stand up, introduce yourself, and speak really loud. Do we have a second? Yes. Oh, okay. Let me grab the second one, and I'll station on the other half of the room.
Hi, I'm Doris. I'm over at SMG. I just have a quick logistical question. So, for the first sheet that you gave us with the numbers,
Are you going to notice that they don't add up?
no,
Because they don't.
No, that was not my question.
Okay,
My
because you're from SMG, your numbers kind of get on.
No, my question is more just about the population, if that includes grad and undergrad students.
No.
And it doesn't. It's strictly undergrad.
Mhm.
Okay, good to know.
Yep.
That's my question.
All right. I'm Dave Mountain from Biomedical Engineering, and I actually have several questions, some of which you touched on briefly, but I think what I'll start with is this this expansion of what's called the range of disabilities that are now we deal with under the law. And in terms of my own experience in engineering, that's where I'm seeing the expansion. It's not in the more classical areas, but I've got a question about that as well. But so, in particular, I've had a couple cases this year where it was a combination of what's called an emotional or problem and a physical problem, a disease or whatever type of thing. And again, as a faculty member who's been cared about this stuff for a long time, I really feel unprepared. I don't even know who they're being helped by at kind of your level. So could you just address that a little bit?
Sure. There is no requirement that students register with our office unless they're asking for an academic accommodation. If they're just cruising around campus and they don't have to register with us. So we don't always know who's out there. We just know who comes in, discloses that they have a disability, and brings us some information about that. And those are the students who've been officially approved for accommodations. There are a lot of students who are out there talking informally to faculty and arranging things on their own. We generally discourage that because I want to know who that student is. I want some input into who they're seeing. Are they connecting with the right offices on campus? If it's an emotional issue, do they have a therapist? Are they following up with medication? So, it may be that the students that you're seeing, if they come with one of our letters, then we have typically talked to them about their treatment, about options. If it's, we want to be very careful that our students with psychiatric disabilities have follow-up and, that they're connected with someone preferably on campus. But again, if they've come to faculty informally and have said, this is my problem and I'm asking you for help, and don't talk to anybody else, then, it's hard for faculty to turn around and say, then I can't help you. But that's what we kind of want you to be able to do.
My question is a little more focused.
Yeah.
In both of these two cases that I had this year,
I think I know those cases.
I did have, they had been talking to at least somebody in the right place. I'm not quite sure, but, it was both cases, it was a combination of, it seemed like a combination. One confided in me in great detail, the other did not. But I think both cases it was both physical and emotional.
Yeah.
And I work with a lot of students, but I don't understand the support structure that people like yourself are providing, so it's kind of hard for me to sort of, as a faculty member, try to accommodate, just not only just an exam or something, but also, if there's someone that...
Well, you had an unusual, and I know who you're talking about, you had an unusually difficult situation. That, so that one is so far, out of the norm of what we usually do, that in general, we like to serve as a clearinghouse for our students with disabilities. Within our office, we have accommodations, we have some training in how to be a self-advocate, how to manage time and materials and things like that. We piggyback with the Educational Resource Center. Glenn is here somewhere. They do a terrific job with that. So we usually send students to the ERC to explore what they have and then supplement it if need be. That a student could meet one-on-one with someone in my office to just have a little further accountability. I'm having trouble handing in my papers, so we may have them check in once a week just to keep them on their toes. So we tailor it around what the student needs. We're not therapists. We don't offer any clinical services, but we refer out for assessment, for treatment. We refer a lot of students to BU Student Health, to behavioral medicine, to Danielson. We have probably more support areas on campus, and sometimes we refer directly to advising. That it's clear to me within 5 minutes that this is a situation that an advisor can clear up much faster than I can. So I like to think of us as sort of the clearinghouse. Once the disability accommodation has been dealt with, well, what else does the student need, and are they hooked up with the right offices? We generally don't give faculty information about a student's disability. Actually, we never do. We're prohibited from doing that. So, I can't call a professor and prepare them and say, you're getting this student with this disability and this is what you need to do. If the student feels that they want to disclose it, it's up to them. So I understand in some cases you're flying blind.
Okay, well, my other question also kind of relates to the New Disabilities Act, and that is sort of, I'll take one of the classic disabilities, and also I'm a hearing researcher, so let's
Okay.
take, hearing impairment.
Mhm.
So under this sort of new regime, how do you establish, and because many of us, myself included, have some kind of mild hearing impairment. It's becoming much more common, unfortunately, in young people.
Yeah.
But how, now with the new system, where do you kind of get that, how do you get that
They still have to
threshold?
bring an audiogram, and it still has to show that there's a significant hearing loss in order to qualify for a transcriptionist or sign language interpreter or note taker or things like that.
Again, with hearing loss, sometimes you have a normal audiogram, but you still have people that are having severe problems
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
functioning. So,
Well, we also interviewed.
so it's the audiologist that you're
It's-
kind of relying on to help you with that
Yeah,
thing.
and they have an interview with one of our staff members in deaf and hard of hearing services, where the student has an opportunity to talk about their functional hearing loss, regardless of what the audiogram tells us.
And presumably it's similar with visual and the other
Yeah,
classic stuff.
yeah.
Okay.
Visual is more complicated because we also want to know what technology the student is comfortable with. So we have a very extensive intake, and that's the difference that the law has made, which is not a bad thing. That we now spend more time actually talking to the individual and less time looking at their reams of medical documentation, so that a student can tell me how this disability affects them in class much more effectively than a neuropsychologist who tested them 2 years ago. So, that's very productive, and, but we're still confident that the students that we're providing accommodations for are legit. We're also trying to work towards a new model in disability services of universal design, where, for example, if a classroom is captioned live for a student who has a hearing impairment, how many other people would benefit from that caption? ESL learners, people who just need, visual learners who need to see something, not just hear it. So it's something that touches everyone's need in addition to the individual with a disability. But it's hard to get faculty on board with that.
Hi, Lori Glenn Wrigley, Educational Resource Center. This question is from the perspective of an instructor in the Department of Romance Studies, teach foreign languages at the university. I would say more often than not, a student will come to me at the beginning of the semester with an accommodation letter, but telling me that they do not want to utilize those accommodations. They want to try to go without. And in the past, I would say 6 or 7 years, I haven't had an instance where a student has not been successful not utilizing the accommodations. However, I do have a friend who's a colleague at another institution who had a similar situation where a student came to him at the beginning of the semester and said, I don't want to use these accommodations. The student started having difficulty and the parents got involved saying, why isn't my son utilizing these resources? He didn't get into trouble, but it was a little bit of a sticky situation.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, what obligation do we as instructors have to make sure that a student is utilizing the resources for which they've been approved?
0.
Okay.
Nil. Negative. We treat students as adults, and as adults, they get to decide what accommodations they're going to use or not use. We generally encourage them to use the accommodations. I generally will say, I understand you want to try it on your own. I understand you're in a new environment. You want to prove that you don't need this, but first semester freshman year is not the best time to try it. But if they choose that, to go that way, that's up to them. And if a professor could certainly say to a student, I know we talked about not using extra time, but I got to tell you, you failed your last 3 exams. I think it's time we reconsider, but you're not obligated to do that. And once the student has disclosed the disability to you, you could follow it up lawfully, but you don't have to.
Hi, my name is Abhishek and I teach in modern language and comparative literature.
You
So,
gave us a
yeah.
pre-prepared question.
Yes, so I've been having this expectation for the last 2 years. And initially, Dean Steve Javi, he helped me. And the problem, especially in the language classes, the situation is, I think, slightly different than large lecture classes. So I have a student, and the student has to move to a disturbance-free classroom and with extra time, and then the student misses that part of the lecture. And I cannot change the whole syllabus because the expectation form or the file is given to me in the second week of September.
Mm.
So I cannot change, and then the student misses that part of lecture. And then I have to prepare everything for one student. And
You're talking about quizzes that happen,
Yeah.
and then the class talks about the quiz.
Yeah, talks
Yeah,
about-
you know, this is all based on a negotiation with the student and the professor at our office. And there are some situations where it simply can't be done. And a student has to choose. You know, yeah, you can have your extra time, but you gotta come early. You gotta come 15 minutes early, and I can't give you a separate room. And that's the reality. That, you know, they have to come to class, they have to be given the opportunity to get the feedback of the quiz, the same as everybody else, and they have to make a choice about the accommodation. And, you know, young students particularly are not known for being flexible that way, but it is okay to say, this is simply not feasible. We've had trouble, for example, with the clicker technologies. Clicker technology isn't accessible yet. So we've had situations where students can't get extra time on quizzes in classes that use clickers, because the clicker doesn't give them, you know, the slide doesn't stop for the student to read it longer. So we've said, look, you're just not going to be able to get your accommodation for this type of situation. If it is substantially penalizing a student, then we have another discussion. How do they, you know, make that up? Is there some extra credit thing? How can we deal with it? So it is very much a negotiation, and I don't mean for you to redesign your syllabus or write a new quiz for that student so that they can go over to, you know, 100 Bay State and take a 15-minute quiz in a separate room.
Can I ask a question?
Other questions?
Can I ask one?
Surely.
In my office, we work a lot with students. I'm Chris Gilchrist from the University Service Center. So I'm not an advisor, but I work a lot with students who are encountering issues. Probably one of the most common ones is the student who maybe in the past in high school has been eligible for accommodations, is struggling with the course load, and they pop up after that deadline to drop with a W, and they're not doing well in 16 credits or 12 credits. They are hoping maybe to drop to reduce their course load, but then there are a whole host of implications that go with that in terms of their financial aid and their charges. And I guess some advice, I know I worked with a student one time where the student had an accommodation for reduced course load, chose not to invoke it, and then cropped up in early, I think it's early November, mid-November, saying, ooh,
Yeah.
now I want to be part-time.
Yeah.
And that was well past the deadline.
Well, we sort of look at a gradation that, you know, obviously we want all students to take, you know, 16 credits, use their accommodations and thrive. But students are, you know, are notorious for not doing what we want them to do. So some students can't take 16 credits, choose to take 3 classes rather than 4, and that's okay, that's still a full course load. Some students, however, can't manage a full course load and need to register for 11 credits or less. We consider that an accommodation of a reduced course load. I know that most schools will approve that separate from us. If we do a reduced course load as an accommodation, that's important because it means that the university considers for this student for that semester, 8 credits or 11 credits is a full course load. So they stay eligible to live in on-campus housing, eligible to use FitRec, and eligible for federal financial assistance. The amount of their assistance will change because part-time students pay per credit. They don't pay the lump sum. So, you know, their financial award is going to be impacted, and we tell them that, and we certainly send them to you for the, you know, for the hard numbers. We understand they live on campus full-time, but they're not paying full tuition. So the awards will adjust, and we'll work with scholarship committees, we'll work with financial assistance, we'll work with benefits if it's a BU student, you know, faculty, staff student, but there will be impacts, and there will be W's on transcripts, and we can't make that stuff go away. There are situations where at the very last minute we've appealed to deans and said, can we even hope for a W instead of, you know, this having to be a failing grade. So there's a lot we can do, and we like to start using those things before the decision is made that the student has to withdraw entirely. That's sort of the last resort. Some students, you know right away, are going to have to withdraw. The student may not know that, but we all know that that's where this is going to end. And, you know, so we're all counseling the student to leave, and the student is fighting, no, I want to stay. Can I just take one class? Can I take it pass-fail? Can I take it pass-fail from my hospital bed? I mean, we've dealt with those students, and I think as a university, we bend over backwards to try to, you know, keep a student here, but, you know, they again, have to be realistic. That if you withdraw, you know, late, there will be a W. It's not the worst thing to have on your transcript. It's not, you know, going to kill someone's career to have that. Getting a failing grade is more significant. So those are discussions that we have, and I think we all work together, advising you guys and us really, really well that way, and we know collectively most of the students that are in that kind of situation.
Hi there, my name is Emily. I work in S&G.
Mhm.
So just a follow-up question.
Sure.
The first step is to send students to the University Service Center or to you directly, if that's the situation?
You know, I would say either, because I'm going to certainly send them to USC if it's their issue, and they're going to send them to me if it's my issue.
Okay.
So I think we understand each other's missions well enough that you could send them either place. If it's a significant medical issue, there's no downside in sending them to us. That even if we do a temporary accommodation, if we give them some language to bring to their faculty. We often have, I know we have a couple of foreign language faculty here, we have attendance issues that affect foreign language more than anything else. So I will have a realistic discussion with the student if they say, well, I haven't been able to go to French for 3 weeks. They're probably going to have to drop that class. And there's nothing that I'll be able to do in terms of an accommodation for that. But there are other classes where we can intercede with the professor. We can say, look, the student's keeping up with the work, hasn't been able to get to class, has been in and out of the hospital. So there is no downside to sending them to us. It doesn't go on their permanent record.
But even after the drop without a W, or drop with a W deadline has passed, we can still send it to you, and maybe there's hope?
Yeah, maybe there's hope, or certainly for the next semester, so it won't happen again.
Great.
And,
Another follow-up question. The international students,
Mhm.
because of course, going part-time can have serious implications there. So how does that get dealt with?
International students can be reduced course load for 2 semesters if ISSO is involved and we're involved. After that, there are significant visa issues. So we like not to invoke that unless we really have to. ISSO has been pretty flexible. Students who the international students have a real pressure to stay, because if they leave, and we shared a student, Steve and I, that made us aware of this, if they leave, it is very difficult to come back. That once you've got you've left for medical reasons, it's next to impossible for many countries to come back to complete your degree here. So we do try to to work with the international students and retain them, but we're not a treatment facility. We're a school. And I understand that some of these kids may be going back home where there's no treatment for their conditions. But if they're not active students here, we can't just keep them because it's what they want. But we certainly will do as much as is possible.
Hi, I just have a quick question about psychiatric disabilities. So I'm intrigued by the increased request for accommodations for people who have, I'm Susan McGurk, by the way, from the Center for Psychiatric Rehab. What psychiatric disabilities are people coming to your office for help with? And what accommodations are provided that may be different from the usual range that are suggested?
Yep. Well, I have Nick Ferranda here, who works with a lot of our students with psychiatric disabilities, so he can speak to the accommodations. We see all types. I had 5 intakes of Asperger's in the past 2 weeks, which is a big blip. We see bipolar. We see we're seeing a lot of adjustment reactions, and typically in the old days we would have said no. This is not a permanent disabling condition. But in this new world order, we might have to do a temporary accommodation for a temporary disability. So we're seeing I'd say a mix. In terms of Nick, do you have more to add to that?
I missed the question.
What types of psychiatric disabilities and what accommodations have we seen increasing?
A lot more depression and anxiety. Accommodations, we're working more on the brief extensions on assignments to be arranged with the professors. We're working on a new agreement between the professor and the students, that there's a more definitive contract that can hold the student and the professor to work together. Extra time, separate room. We're doing a lot more SES, or strategic education services, which is
So like supported ed light.
So what I'm very curious, what are those services?
Those we work with the students, usually come in about once a week. We meet with myself or our interns, and we work on organization, time management, prioritization, creating schedules. We can facilitate contact with professors or other individuals that they need to talk with around work that needs to be handed in or meetings that we need to go to. Basically, all the academic things that aren't in a classroom that are vital for success. And with those kinds of disabilities, those processes are impacted. And so having that person to come in and meet with is a way to force them to check in with themselves and to give them a realistic look of where they're at and what's going on, and kind of a way to help them keep going.
That's great. Do you measure effectiveness of those particular kinds of?
Do I measure what?
Effectiveness
No.
of those?
No, we've always thought about doing it, but we've never done any outcome, assessments.
Well, maybe I'll follow up then.
Please do. Please do.
It's great.
I know that there were a couple of, we got to some of those. Somebody had asked about a student has documented disabilities in high school but hasn't declared in college. The process looks exactly the same. There's no guarantee that because someone got accommodations or services in high school, they'll get them in college. Totally different set of laws, totally different process. So they still need to come to us, disclose, bring us documentation, and we might say no. Again, more likely to say maybe or yes now than before, but we can say no. I'm sorry, I get that you got these things in high school, but I don't see the evidence for them now. Or maybe the accommodations you got in high school don't translate to college. We've seen accommodations like only professors who are engaging and organized. Welcome to the real world. You're going to ask for bosses who are engaging and organized. Written instructions. Well, that's a syllabus. You're not going to get specific written instructions. Templates for essays. I mean, there are some unrealistic things. Waivers on foreign language and math. I mean, there are things that we just don't do here. There are other times that the student has to rephrase. They're used to having a reader and a scribe, and instead now we have to talk to them about, dictation software or other things that they might use instead of readers and scribes. So a lot of it is just growing the accommodations. Sometimes it's telling them, your school was very generous, but we're not seeing that you need them. So, but the process doesn't change at all. I think we answered. Is Shelley here? No. Shelley asked about common physical and mental health conditions. I think we covered those. This is a good one. Should students give paperwork to professors if they require more time on exams, or do we take the student's word for it? No. You should insist that faculty have the letter. You should insist that the student deliver the letter in a timely fashion per the date on the letter. We do a new letter every semester for every class. And so last semester's letter is not going to work. If the student comes in December and the letter was written in September, then that's a problem. Timeliness of notification is one of the few situations in which a faculty member can say no. Student comes up a day before the exam and says, I need extra time, you can say no, you just haven't given me enough time to plan this. Rarely, we have situations where we've just approved the student and we know an exam is coming up. In most of those instances, someone from my office will contact the professor and say, we're sorry for the lateness of this request. We would greatly appreciate it if you can facilitate this. We understand if you can't. But we don't tell students that they can waltz in the night before an exam and say, this is what I need, give it to me. Because a faculty member can say no. But you should always expect a letter, because students lie. Doesn't happen often, but they make things up. They forgot to ask for their letters, so that they're embarrassed to come to us, so they'll go directly to a professor. But you can always call us and ask. If a student says, I get extra time, and you don't have a letter, you can always call our office and we'll check and we'll tell you, nope, never heard of the student, or yes, she just didn't come in this semester yet, so you don't have to do anything. Nikki's going to add to that, because he writes those emails.
There are also times, just like Lori's talking about, where we know that the exam is coming up and we know that we're going to write the letters and accommodate them. And there are times where, because I'm wanting to work with them around self-advocacy skills, that I encourage them to go and talk with the professors directly around the same circumstances where sometimes we might give a call. And for those times, I usually give some business cards of mine to give to the students, to have the student approach the professor and say, I've met with Office of Disability Services, they're preparing my letters, I know the exam is a week away, but the letters might not come in enough time to get you prepared. I've spoken with Nick, if you want to verify that what I'm telling you is the truth, please contact him, email or call him, and he can verify that, what I'm telling you is the truth.
Huh?
So is there any obligation of faculty to respond to a phone call that an advisor has placed to them regarding a specific student? Like if there's an issue that's documented with behavioral medicine?
An obligation?
Well, I mean, I know it's a professional
Yeah.
courtcy
Yeah.
that they should probably try to work with the advisor to make sure that the student is okay.
Mm.
But if there's documented, I guess, evidence that the student is having an actual problem, and, if I left a message to a faculty, or tried to get a hold of them, and they don't respond at all, is there?
I would direct that then to their dean, because, obviously, faculty are, expected to be on the wall and respond to situations that sound urgently. I'm not an attorney, I don't even pretend to be one, but I know that there's case law which has found faculty responsible for situations where they did not respond, to a student in some, distress, who had sent distress signals to a faculty member, not followed up, not, sought assistance with the situation. So it's in the faculty's best interest to respond to anyone who calls them. I generally find that faculty contact me about problem students they're worried about very frequently. That, they don't know what else to do, so they'll contact me, I'm worried about this student. And it may be someone we know, more commonly it's someone we don't know. And so we will then direct them through the Students in Distress protocol, or invite them to contact their associate deans and, and advising offices. So I don't find faculty to be reluctant to contact me, but they're busy folks, and they come with their own sets of preconceptions and concerns that may not be the same as ours. I know that there was a library issue, and I see my friend Tom sitting in the back. And this had to do specifically with students with physical disabilities coming into the library and asking.
Well, they approached us by email.
Yes.
Without identifying exactly.
Yes. Again, there are a lot of students out there that we just may not know. And they use our facilities. They're supposed to contact us if they have access issues that are not being met. So in the ideal world, that student would have contacted us, and we might have done the accommodation of library assistance for them and previewed you and told you, we're sending you this student who's going to need someone to help her get books off the shelf. But absent that, someone who just comes up and says, I need assistance getting books off the shelf, if you've got the staff and you've got the time, you can do that, or you can make an appointment for the student to come back and say, we're happy to help you, but right now we don't have the staff to help you. It sounded like this particular individual had a student helper with her already. So,
Yeah, it turned out, in fact, that we had no idea beforehand.
Yeah, and you don't have to respond right on the spot. If, that's again a timely notification of need. If you can do it, great. If you can't, if you're having a staff meeting and everyone's tied up, or if you had an hour to anticipate it, you could have recruited a student worker, then you can absolutely say, let's make an appointment to have you come back and we'll collect what you need. But generally, a student who needs library assistance has to request that as an accommodation through us, and then, we would direct you. But, it's one of those, if you can do it, great.
Right, and not knowing whether it was a student you had worked with or not,
Yeah.
I was reluctant to say, yes, we will do this, or go ahead and do it in advance.
Yeah.
And, we want to, I want to treat all students equally. The stacks are open. If you need physical help getting them, yes, we'll be glad to help you, but, you need to tell us.
Yeah, and you can't be cagey about it. And,
Right,
and
right.
some people are, because they're expecting they're expecting discrimination. Or they're expecting the door to be slammed in their face, so they will be cagey. What assistance do you offer someone who needs help?
Right.
And they're like, well, for what? What kind of assistance do you want? I mean, give me more information. But they approach it that way first, just to see if it's going to be a friendly reception. And then you say, we're happy to help anyone with a disability who requires it. Can you tell me more about, your situation? What do you need? Oh, well, I'm in a wheelchair and I can't reach the high shelves. Terrific, here's what we're gonna do. Or I need a private study, Carol, because I have attention problems. So you can push for that information, and they're looking for the welcoming tone. That, that we're happy to help you, just tell us a little bit more about yourself. So.
Debbie Miller, Study Abroad. I just wanted to let everyone know that we also work very closely with Lori and Nick and the Office of Disability Services for students who study abroad, and have work with them to have accommodation letters sent when appropriate to our sites. But just to let students know too that our office serves as a resource as far as having a discussion about what accommodations might be available at particular sites, what sites might be more or less appropriate depending on what the students'
Another situation where we expect students to be reasonable and flexible. That, we'd like the world to be fully accessible to anyone at all times, but it's not the case. You can't, go to, can't easily go to Venice in a wheelchair. And, so students have to be flexible about that.
I think we're approaching 1.
You are all welcome to call, email, with individual concerns about students, your own kids. And we get calls from everybody about all different kinds of things, and I'm happy to get them.
Me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Baker from Mythology Fine Arts.
I want to talk to you before you leave.
All right. Thanks.
We've been playing, email tag.
Yeah.